The sky over Normandy was grey that morning, the kind of grey that promised rain but delivered thunder instead. The air still carried the scent of salt and smoke from the D-Day invasion weeks before. Fields once filled with wheat and wildflowers were now carved by tank treads and stained with the memory of men who had fallen before the harvest. Captain Daniel Rowe walked through the mist, his boots sinking into the soft mud of a road that used to lead to a farmhouse. He was 28, though the war had aged him far beyond that. His uniform bore the marks of long marches and sleepless nights. The silver bar on his shoulder caught the first light of dawn, dull and tired, like him. Behind him, a column of soldiers trudged forward, rifles slung, helmets tilted low. Among them was Private Michael Rowe, Danny's younger brother. 19, full of restless fire, he still carried the ghost of the boy who used to chase baseballs across Kansas fields. But now, his hands shook just enough to remind him that the boy was gone. Danny paused and turned, scanning the line. He spotted Mick struggling to light a cigarette, his hands cupped against the morning wind. Danny walked back, plucked the match from his brother's hand, and struck it himself. "Still can't get it right, huh?" Danny said, a faint smile touching his lips. "Guess they don't teach fire lighting in boot camp," Mick replied, grinning. "Thought you'd have my back, Captain." Danny exhaled, watching the smoke curl into the mist. "Out here, you keep your head low and your matches drier than your pride." Mick laughed softly, the sound small against the vast emptiness around them. For a moment, they weren't in France. They were home, two brothers standing in the fading light behind their father's barn, arguing about who could throw a baseball farther. But the illusion broke with the distant thud of artillery. The sound rolled across the countryside like an angry god clearing his throat. The men tightened their grips on their rifles. Danny glanced east, toward the front. "All right, boys," he said, voice steady, "let's move. Keep your spacing. Cole wants us at the crossroads by 0800. As they marched on, Mick fell into step beside his brother. "You think it's true?" he asked. "What?" "They say the Krauts are pulling back, regrouping near St. Lo." Danny nodded slowly. "That's what command says. But I've learned something out here, kid." "What's that?" "Command doesn't bleed." The words hung heavy between them. Mick didn't reply. He didn't need to. They reached the remnants of a French village before noon, half-burned houses, a church spire snapped in two. The smell of wet ash clung to everything. Danny motioned for the men to fan out and search for supplies. Inside what was left of a bakery, Mick found a cracked mirror propped against the wall. He stared at it, at the dirt, the sweat, the dark crescents under his eyes. He touched his cheek, remembering how his mother used to wipe flour off his face after baking bread. "Hell of a place to find yourself," he whispered. From outside, Danny called his name. Mick straightened, grabbed his rifle, and stepped back into the open. Danny stood by a well, holding a folded map. "Orders just came in," Danny said. "We're pushing through the woods east of here tonight. Recon patrol spotted enemy movement, small unit, maybe 30 men. Could be retreating, could be regrouping." Mick's eyes narrowed. "And we're going after them." Danny looked at him. "Yeah." The wind shifted, carrying the faint toll of the broken church bell, a hollow sound that lingered in the air long after it should have died that evening. The light died slowly over Normandy. The sky burned orange before sinking into deep violet, the color of bruises on the horizon. The men sat in silence around small, hidden fires, their faces dim and flickering like ghosts. Mick sat apart, cleaning his rifle with quiet determination. He wasn't afraid of the dark, he was afraid of what waited inside it. Across from him, Danny wrote in a small leather notebook, the kind soldiers carried for letters they might never send. "What do you keep writing in there?" Mick finally asked, not looking up. Danny smirked faintly. "Things I'll tell Ma when we get home." Mick's eyes flickered. "You think she still waits by the porch light?" Danny paused, his pencil hovering mid-word. "She always did, even when Dad came home late. Even when the radio said the worst." A moment passed, filled only by the quiet pop of the fire. "You ever think about what happens if we don't make it back?" Mick asked, voice low. Danny closed the notebook, tucking it into his jacket. "You'll make it back. You always do. You were the lucky one." Mick gave a short laugh. "Lucky? Out here?" Danny met his eyes, serious now. "I'm not joking. When the shells start falling, stay behind me. You hear?" "Yeah," Mick said softly, "just like when we were kids." Danny nodded once. "Exactly like that." At midnight, they moved. The platoon crept through the woods under the veil of darkness, moonlight slashing through the trees in pale beams. Every twig snap, every rustle of leaves felt like a gunshot. The men spoke only with hand signals, years of training condensed into the smallest gestures. Danny led from the front, moving with silent precision. Mick followed a few steps behind, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his teeth. The night air was cold, heavy with the smell of wet earth and fear. They reached a clearing near. The river, what was left of a French farmhouse, sat on the far side, half collapsed. The wind carried faint voices, German, indistinct but real. Danny motioned for the men to take cover. He peered through binoculars. 6 soldiers, rifles slung, moving around a truck. A small patrol, maybe the vanguard of a larger force. He turned to Sergeant Harker. We flank from the east. Quiet and fast. No heroics. Mick's pulse quickened. He looked at his brother, the calm in his face, the stillness before motion. He'd always admired that. Danny could make chaos feel like a plan. But war doesn't follow plans. As they crept forward, Mick caught sight of something gleaming in the grass, a silver locket, half buried in mud. He paused for a second too long, reached down, brushed the dirt away. Inside, a faded photograph of a woman and child stared back. That's when the first shot cracked through the silence. The Germans had spotted them. Bullets sliced through the dark like streaks of white fire. The woods exploded into chaos, shouts, screams, the deafening echo of rifles. Danny dove behind a fallen log, yelling orders. Flank left. Keep low. Mick hit the ground beside him, mud splattering his face. His hands shook, but his training kicked in. He aimed and fired, the recoil slamming through his shoulder. He saw a figure drop in the distance. The air stank of gunpowder and rain. The world was flashing in bursts of light and shadow, muzzle flashes, explosions, the sharp whistle of bullets cutting through leaves. Danny raised his head just as a grenade landed a few feet away. His eyes went wide. Mick, down, he shouted, and threw himself toward his brother. The explosion tore the ground apart. The sound was pure white noise, swallowing everything. When it cleared, Danny was on the ground, blood streaking down his temple. Mick scrambled to his side. Danny, can you hear me? Danny's eyes fluttered. I'm fine, he rasped, though his hand trembled against the wound. Get the others out of here. Go, I'm not leaving you, Mick shouted, his voice breaking. Go. Danny's tone carried a command that only a brother could disobey, and yet, somehow, obey all the same. Mick hesitated for a heartbeat, just one, then nodded, pulled his brother's pistol from the mud, and turned toward the fight. That's when he saw it, through the smoke and gunfire, a German officer retreating toward the truck, a red insignia flashing on his arm. Their eyes met for half a second, and in that second, something passed between them, not hatred, but promise. A promise written in the firelight of war. Mick would remember that face. He didn't know it yet, but that man's life would become the single thread that held his purpose together. The night had each flash of light carved the forest into shards, brief glimpses of life and death stitched together by thunder. When the last German shout faded, only the rain remained, hissing on burning timber and blood-wet leaves. Mick stumbled through the smoke. The world rang in his ears, a high, needling sound that made his thoughts feel far away. He saw silhouettes moving, friendly and not, but all he could think of was Danny. He found him near the crater, half covered in dirt, one arm twisted under him. Danny was breathing, shallow and uneven. Mick dropped to his knees. Stay with me, Danny, hey, look at me. Danny's eyes opened just enough to catch the reflection of firelight. You still got my pistol? Mick nodded, fighting the tremor in his voice. Yeah. Danny's mouth curled into something that might have been a smile. Then finish what we started, get the men to the crossroads. Mick wanted to say 1,000 things, none of them about tactics. But words felt small in that moment. I'll get you out of here, he said instead. He tried to lift Danny, but the captain winced hard, clutching his side. A medic slid beside them, shouting orders, pressing gauze into the wound. He's hit bad, lung, maybe worse. The radio crackled. Lieutenant Cole's voice came through the static. All units pull back to line Bravo, enemy armor incoming. Mick looked down the slope and saw it, a faint orange glow moving through the trees, the guttural churn of engines. Tanks. The Germans were counter-attacking. He slung Danny's arm over his shoulder, teeth gritted. We're moving, Captain. Danny tried to speak but coughed blood instead. The medic shook his head. If we run now, he won't make it. Mick didn't hear him, or didn't care. He dragged his brother through mud that sucked at his boots, through branches that clawed at his uniform. Behind them, machine gun fire tore through the night. Every breath was a promise. Every step, defiance. They reached the edge of the woods where a battered jeep waited. Mick turned back for one last look at the battlefield, the place that had swallowed so many names he would never know. The sky pulsed red above it, like a heartbeat fading into black. As they lifted Danny into the jeep, his hand caught Mick's wrist with surprising strength. If I don't say it, Mick cut him off. Danny's eyes locked onto his. Then make it mean something. The jeep roared to life. Mud splattered, shells burst somewhere in the distance, and the brothers disappeared into the storm of retreating men. Dawn crept in pale and silent. The storm had passed, but the land looked flayed, trees ripped open, soil churned, the river running brown with silt and ash. In a makeshift field hospital just behind the line, canvas walls flapped weakly in the wind. Mick sat on an ammunition crate outside the tent, hands streaked with dried blood that wasn't all his own. Every few minutes the canvas would lift, and he'd glimpse nurses moving quickly between the cots. Each time, hope twisted in him like a knife. Sergeant Harker stepped out, helmet under one arm, face grey with fatigue. He stopped in front of Mick, unsure what to say. The silence said it for him. Mick looked up slowly. He's gone, isn't he? Harker hesitated, then gave a small, helpless nod. He saved half the squad out there. We'll see to the report. Mick stared at the dirt. A bead of rain slid down his temple, tracing a line through the grime. He didn't wipe it away. The Germans who hit us, he said quietly. Do we know who they were? Harker shook his head. Scouts think it was the 17th Panzer. Some officer leading him. Red insignia, they said. The words struck like shrapnel. The red insignia, the man by the truck. The eyes that had met his through smoke. Mick stood, the movement sharp, purposeful. Then I'm going to find him. Harker frowned. Listen, kid, revenge doesn't bring anybody back. No, Mick said, but it keeps them from dying for nothing. He turned and walked toward the ridge where the battlefield lay quiet now, except for the crows. He stopped at the edge and looked out across the broken fields. His brother's fields now, every inch of them paid for. The wind carried the faint echo of Danny's voice. Make it mean something. Mick unclipped the silver locket he had found the night before, opened it, and stared again at the picture of the woman and child inside. He closed it gently, slid it into his pocket, and whispered to the horizon, I will. Somewhere far to the east, the thunder of guns rolled again, soft and distant. The war was moving on. And so was he. Rain fell again over Normandy, washing away the tracks of another battle. The fields that had once been green were a wasteland of mud and metal, a graveyard without names. Private Michael Rowe stood among the ruins, helmet in hand, as the chaplain's voice trembled through the damp air. And though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we will fear no evil. The words meant little to him now. He stared at the wooden cross driven into the earth before him, the name carved into it barely legible beneath the rain. Captain Daniel Rowe, 28th Infantry Division, June 29, 1944. The sound of the rain drowned out the rest of the prayer. Around him, soldiers shifted uncomfortably, each of them thinking of their own ghosts. When the chaplain closed the Bible, Mick didn't move. He stayed long after the others had gone, until the last shovel of dirt had covered the mound. He knelt and placed Danny's pistol on the grave. You always said not to do anything stupid. He whispered, but you never told me what to do when you were gone. The war didn't stop for grief. By morning, Mick was back on the march. His new commanding officer, Lieutenant Cole, had little patience for sentiment. Rowe, Cole barked, glancing over a clipboard. You're a good shot, I'll give you that, but I need soldiers, not ghosts. You understand me? Yes, sir. Good. You'll be joining Recon Platoon 3. We're pushing towards St. Lo. St. Lo, the same direction Danny had been heading before the ambush. The same stretch of hell where Mick had seen the man with the red insignia. Cole kept talking, but Mick barely heard him. His mind had already left the tent, already running through mud and fire again. That night, when the camp settled and the rain finally stopped, Mick sat by the faint glow of a lantern, flipping open his brother's notebook. The pages were stained, some torn, but the handwriting was there, strong, steady. Notes on positions, supply routes, and a single line near the end that caught his breath. If anything happens, make it mean something. He traced the words with his thumb. They felt heavier now, like an order he could never refuse. 2 days later, Recon 3 moved out. They advanced through hedgerows so dense they felt like green walls. Every path was a potential trap, every bush could hide a rifle barrel. Corporal Jennings, the squad's radio man, tried to lighten the mood. "You hear about the Kraut sniper last week? Dropped 3 guys in 30 seconds. Bet he's gunning for a record." Mick didn't answer. He was focused on the ground, footprints half filled with rainwater. "Fresh. Eyes up," he murmured. The words were quiet, but the tone carried command. The others followed suit. Cole might have been in charge on paper, but on the ground, they followed Mick. Minutes passed. A crow cawed in the distance. Once, twice, then silence. Mick froze. The crow hadn't flown. Someone had startled it. He raised a hand, signaling stop. The men dropped into the mud just as the first machine gun burst tore through the air. The air cracked with gunfire. Dirt and leaves erupted around him as the Germans opened up from behind a low stone wall. Mick threw himself flat, mud splattering across his face. "Cover fire," he yelled, already crawling forward. Jennings fumbled for the radio. "Recon 3 under fire, grid 7. Request." The rest was lost in the staccato thunder of bullets. Mick didn't wait for permission. He darted behind a fallen tree, pulled the pin on a grenade, counted to 3, then threw. The explosion rocked the wall. Screams followed. He was already moving, rifle up, breath tight, eyes burning. He rose over the shattered wall and fired in bursts, each shot deliberate, mechanical, perfect. When the smoke cleared, 3 German soldiers lay still. But there was movement behind them, a flash of red. Not the red of blood. A patch. Torn, faded, but unmistakable, the red wolf insignia. The same one he had seen on the officer's arm that night. Mick froze, heart pounding. The man was running, limping, clutching his shoulder. A retreat. Without thinking, Mick vaulted the wall and chased after him. "Rowe," Jennings shouted. "Get back here. Orders are to hold." But Mick didn't hear. He pushed through the brush, boots slipping in the mud. The forest swallowed him. Branches whipped at his face. His lungs burned. The man ahead stumbled again, turning just enough for Mick to see his face, sharp features, blonde hair, eyes wide with fear. The officer raised his pistol, fired wildly, missed. Mick dropped to one knee and fired back. The shot caught the German in the leg. He fell hard, sliding down a slope. Mick followed, rifle trained. The officer tried to crawl away, muttering in German. Mick reached him, pressing the barrel against his neck. The man's eyes darted up, desperate. Bit nicked. Mick's finger trembled on the trigger. For a moment, he saw his brother's face, calm, steady, telling him to stop. Then he saw the graves. The burning trucks. The empty helmet in the mud. The trigger clicked. The shot echoed through the forest like thunder. Mick stared down at the body, chest heaving. The red wolf insignia stared back at him, soaked in blood. He tore it off, shoved it into his pocket, and turned back toward camp. By the time he returned, the others had secured the position. Lieutenant Cole stormed toward him, fury in his eyes. "Where the hell were you, Rowe?" "Flanking maneuver," Mick said flatly. Cole glared. "You broke formation. You could have gotten your men killed. But I didn't. That's not the damn point." Mick met his gaze, steady, unflinching. "The point is, we won." Cole's jaw tightened. He looked like he wanted to say more, but the sound of artillery in the distance ended the argument. "Get your gear," Cole snapped. "We move again at dawn." Mick nodded, but his thoughts were far away, on the insignia in his pocket. That night, under the dim light of a cigarette, he pulled it out and stared at it. It wasn't the same officer. The face didn't match, but the symbol, the wolf, was the same. That meant there were more. And somewhere among them was the man he was really after. Mick crushed the patch in his fist, eyes glinting in the dying light. The war had just gotten personal. The rain had stopped, but the mud clung to everything: boots, rifles, skin. The men moved like shadows through the hedgerows, nerves stretched thin by too many nights without sleep. Mick walked at the rear of the column, rifle slung low, eyes scanning every ridge and tree line. Each sound made his heart race. Every face of every German prisoner they passed was another reminder. It could be him. The Red Wolf. The one who took his brother. He hadn't told anyone about the insignia. Not Cole, not Jennings, not the chaplain. It was his alone, his secret and his mission. That night, when camp was quiet, Mick unfolded Danny's notebook again. He read the last line aloud under his breath. If anything happens, make it mean something. His voice cracked. He looked up at the stars, barely visible through the smoke of the battlefield. I'm trying, Danny, he whispered. But I don't know if it's enough. He barely slept. At dawn, Lieutenant Cole gathered the men around a jeep hood covered with a field map. Command wants us to push toward Carrington, Cole said. Intel says German officers from the 17th Panzer regrouped there. If we can cut their supply lines, we choke the whole flank. At the mention of 17th Panzer, Mick's pulse quickened. Sir, he said carefully, what about the reports from Saint-Germain? Locals said a column of armor moved east 2 nights ago. That could be the same unit. Cole shot him a hard look. You're not in charge of Intel, Rowe. But if it's the same insignia, Cole slammed a fist on the hood. You listen to me, soldier. You follow orders. That's how we keep men alive. You want to play hero, go write your own damn war. The men fell silent. Mick clenched his jaw. He didn't answer, but inside, something snapped. That evening, Recon 3 bivouacked on a ridge overlooking Carrington. The town below glowed faintly from burning oil drums. German trucks moved in the streets like ants. Cole called it in, ordered the men to rest before the dawn assault. But Mick didn't rest. He sat in the dark, staring through his binoculars. Then he saw it, the Red Wolf insignia, painted on a half-track near the bridge. His heart pounded. That was it. That was the mark. He glanced back at camp, Jennings snoring, Cole scribbling in his logbook. The rest asleep. Mick should have waited. He should have stayed. But vengeance doesn't sleep. He packed his rifle, checked his ammunition, and slipped away into the night. The descent into town was silent except for the distant rumble of thunder. He moved like a ghost, sticking to the shadows, every step measured. At the edge of the bridge, he crouched behind the wreck of a cart and peered out. 2 German sentries stood near the half-track, rifles slung, smoking cigarettes. Behind them, an officer in a dark coat gave orders to a small group. The Red Wolf patch gleamed faintly on his sleeve. Mick raised his rifle, breath steady. He aimed for the officer's head, finger tightening on the trigger, when a flare burst overhead. White light flooded the street. Americana, one of the guards shouted. Bullets ripped through the cart, splinters flying. Mick dove for cover, firing back. His shot caught one guard square in the chest, dropping him instantly. The other ran for the truck, shouting for help. Mick sprinted after him, straight into a hail of gunfire. Pain exploded in his shoulder. He hit the ground hard. The world spun. The officer turned, the red insignia burning bright in the flare's glare, and for a moment, their eyes locked. Cold, calm, unflinching. Then the officer vanished into the smoke, barking orders as soldiers swarmed the street. Mick crawled toward the river, clutching his bleeding arm, every movement agony. He stumbled into the water, its freezing current dragging him downstream. Behind him, shouts in German echoed through the night. He didn't stop until the lights of Carrington were gone. When dawn came, Cole found the trail of blood leading away from camp. He didn't need to ask whose it was. Damn it, Rowe, he muttered. What have you done? The river carried him for miles. Cold water numbed the pain, but the blood loss made the world blur at the edges. Mick's fingers dug into the muddy bank until he finally dragged himself onto land. He lay there for a long time, staring at the treetops swaying against the grey dawn sky. His shoulder burned with every breath. His helmet was gone. His rifle, too. Only the Red Wolf patch remained in his pocket, wet and dark with blood. He pulled it out, looked at it, and laughed, a broken, bitter sound swallowed by the forest. Is this what you wanted, Danny? He whispered. Is this what meaning looks like? The laughter turned to coughing. He pressed a hand against his wound and forced himself up. He needed to get back. He needed to finish what he'd started. 3 days later, Recon 3 found him, or what was left of him. Jennings spotted him first, slumped against a tree near a burned-out farmhouse. His uniform was torn, eyes hollow, face pale as chalk. Jesus, Mick, Jennings breathed, dropping to his knees beside him. We thought you were dead. Mick opened his eyes slowly. Almost was. Behind Jennings, Lieutenant Cole approached, his expression a mix of anger and relief. You broke orders, Cole said quietly. You abandoned your post, cost us a man, and nearly gave away our position. Mick didn't respond. He just stared at the dirt. Cole crouched beside him. Command wants you court-martial Ed. They're calling it desertion. Still nothing. Cole exhaled and looked away. But I'm not turning you in. Not yet. Mick's eyes flicked up, confused. You think I don't get it? Cole said. You think I don't have ghosts? But this, he gestured at Mick's ruined arm, the blood-streaked uniform, the hollow stare, this ISN. Justice. It's suicide. Mick's voice was low, cracked. He killed my brother. Cole stared at him for a long moment. And if you kill him, what then? You think it ends there? Mick didn't answer, because deep down, he already knew the truth. It wouldn't. That night, as the squad camped in the ruins of the farmhouse, Jennings handed Mick a tin of coffee. You're lucky Cole's covering for you, he muttered. Next stunt like that, he won't. Mick nodded absently. He sat near the window, watching lightning flicker over the horizon. His wound throbbed, but the pain kept him awake, kept him human. From his pocket, he pulled out the insignia again. The red wolf. He turned it over in his hand, tracing the frayed edges. A storm rolled closer, thunder shaking the walls. Outside, the wind carried faint voices, German patrols searching the woods. They were close. Jennings looked up from his pack. You hear that? Mick didn't move. His eyes stayed on the insignia. Yeah, he said softly. I hear them. He gripped his rifle, reloaded despite the pain, and stared out into the storm. Cole's words echoed in his mind. It's not justice. It's suicide. But Danny's voice was louder. Make it mean something. The thunder rolled again, like artillery. And Mick Rowe smiled, a slow, haunted smile that didn't reach his eyes. The fall was complete. The war had moved east, but Mick Rowe didn't move with it. The rest of the 28th Infantry pushed forward into the French countryside, clearing villages, liberating towns. But Mick stayed behind, in the forests and ruins, in the places the maps forgot. Officially, he was missing in action. Unofficially, he was something else entirely. He'd become a shadow. For 3 weeks, he stalked the roads between Carrington and St. Lo, tracking what was left of the 17th Panzer Division. Every burned-out convoy, every shell crater, every rumor from fleeing villages, he followed them all. At first, it was instinct. Survival. Then it became obsession. He kept the red wolf patch sewn into the inside of his jacket, a reminder of what he was hunting. The name of the officer still haunted his memory. Oberst Reinhard Klaus, commander of the unit that ambushed Danny's convoy. The one who smiled through the smoke. Mick didn't know if Klaus was still alive. But the rumor was enough. And rumors, in war, are the only truth that matters. By late July, Mick had made contact with a group of French resistance fighters operating near the town of Tessy-sur-Vire. They were a ragged band, farmers, deserters, kids with more courage than sense. Their leader, a sharp-eyed woman named Claire Duval, met him under the ruins of an old church. You're American, she said, eyeing the tattered uniform. Mick replied. She smirked. We heard about you. The ghost who hunts Germans in the woods. They say you don't take prisoners. Mick didn't answer. Claire leaned closer, studying him. You're looking for someone. He nodded. German officer. Red wolf insignia. Klaus. Claire's expression darkened. We've seen that mark. Near the river crossing north of Tessy. Supply post. He's still alive. Mick's pulse quickened. Can you get me there? Claire tilted her head. Depends. What's in it for us? Mick reached into his pack, pulled out a folded map, and spread it across a broken altar. There's an ammo convoy moving east tomorrow. I know the route, the guards, the timing. Help me find Klaus. It's yours. She studied him for a moment longer, then smiled faintly. You're either very brave, or very broken, Monsieur Rowe. Maybe both. That night, Mick sat alone by the ruins, cleaning his rifle. Rain fell softly through the collapsed roof, hissing against the fire. He stared into the flames, seeing his brother's face flicker in the smoke. Danny was smiling, that same quiet, steady smile he'd always worn when things got bad. Mick blinked, and the image vanished. He rubbed his eyes, sleep-deprived, starving, maybe even losing it, but none of that mattered. Not until Klaus was dead. He reached into his coat, touching the red patch sewn against his heart. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow, this ends. At dawn, the resistance gathered near the edge of the forest. Claire loaded her rifle and nodded to Mick. Convoy passes the bridge in 20 minutes. Mick tightened his sling, eyes sharp. Remember, the officer in the staff car is mine. She raised an eyebrow. You kill him, the Germans come hunting us. You sure he's worth it? Mick's voice was cold. He's the only thing that is. They slipped into position as engines rumbled in the distance. The first truck appeared, armored, followed by 2 half-tracks and a black Mercedes staff car. Mick felt his breath slow, his finger brushing the trigger. The car rolled closer. Through the windshield, he saw him, the unmistakable profile of Reinhard Klaus, the wolf insignia gleaming on his coat. The man who killed his brother. And this time, Mick was ready. He exhaled slowly, lining up the shot, then a child ran into the road. The convoy screeched to a halt. Soldiers shouted. Claire hissed through her teeth, motioning her men to hold. Mick's scope shifted, from Klaus to the child, a little French boy clutching a tin can, frozen in terror. The officer stepped out of the car, barking orders in German. He shoved the boy aside, irritated, unaware that death was watching from the trees. Mick's jaw clenched. He could end it right there. One shot, one trigger pull, but the boy was too close. One mistake, and he'd kill an innocent. For the first time in weeks, Mick hesitated. And in war, hesitation is death. A flash erupted behind him, a German spotter's flare. The ambush was blown. Scheisse, Amerikaner, bullets tore through the air. The crack of gunfire split the morning air. The ambush was blown. Mick hit the dirt behind a tree as bullets chewed through bark above his head. He could smell the cordite, taste mud in his mouth. The convoy's gunners had the road locked down, 2 MG-42s spitting fire in overlapping arcs. Claire's fighters scrambled for cover on the opposite slope. Fall back, someone shouted in French. Mick ignored it. His eyes were fixed on the black Mercedes. Klaus was there, shouting orders, waving his pistol, trying to organize his men. Mick slammed a fresh clip into his M1. He leaned out, aimed low, and fired. One of the MG crews dropped. Another gun swung toward him. He dove behind the log, rounds shredding the air where his head had been a heartbeat earlier. The boy, the one who'd run into the road, was gone. Thank God. Mick crawled sideways through the brush, moving down toward the convoy's flank. Years of training took over. Short bursts, controlled breathing, never linger in one place. He popped up again, fired twice, one hit a German square in the chest, the other ricocheted off a fender. Cover fire, Claire yelled. Her people opened up from the tree line, sporadic but enough to split the Germans' attention. Mick used the gap. He sprinted down the slope, slid behind a smoking truck, and came up firing. 2 more Germans fell. He reloaded, ducked low, heart hammering. Then, silence. Just the hiss of smoke and the ticking of cooling engines. He glanced around. The road was a mess of wrecked metal and bodies. Claire's group was regrouping uphill. The staff car door hung open. Empty. Mick's stomach turned cold. Klaus was gone. He found the tracks a few minutes later, boots and blood leading into the forest on the far side of the road. He followed without hesitation. The world shrank to sound and breath. The chirp of insects. The rustle of branches. The rasp of his own lungs. Then he saw movement ahead, a figure stumbling between trees, hand pressed to his side. Klaus. Mick raised his rifle. The shot would be easy, 70 yards, broad daylight. He could end it right now. But something inside him twisted. A clean shot from a distance. After all of this, it wasn't enough. Not for Danny. He lowered the rifle and started running. Branches whipped across his face as he closed the distance. Klaus turned at the sound, pale, terrified, pistol trembling in his hand. He fired twice, wild shots that went wide. Mick slammed into him, the 2 of them crashing hard into the mud. They rolled, grappling for the pistol. It went off. Once, deafening. Mick caught Klaus's wrist, wrenched it sideways until the bone gave with a snap. The German screamed. Do you know my brother's name? Mick shouted over him. Do you even remember them? Klaus gasped, shaking his head, words spilling in German. Ich weiß nicht. Danny Rowe, Mick roared, pressing the barrel of his rifle against the man's throat. Say it. Klaus's eyes filled with fear, or maybe confusion. I don't know. Mick's finger trembled on the trigger. Every instinct told him to pull it. Every part of him wanted to. Then a voice behind him, Claire's, cut through the haze. Rowe, don't. He froze. Her rifle was trained on him. He's beaten, she said quietly. You kill him, you're no better than him. Mick's breathing slowed. The world narrowed to 2 sounds, Klaus's ragged breath and the hammer of his own heart. He let out a long, shaking exhale. The rifle dropped from his hands. Klaus sagged, alive but broken. Claire lowered her gun, eyes hard. You need to decide who you are, American, soldier, or ghost. Mick didn't answer. He just stared at his brother's dog tags hanging around his neck, mud-stained and heavy. Then he stood, turned away from Klaus, and started walking into the trees. Behind him, thunder rolled again. The war wasn't over, but something inside him was. The forest was quiet after the fight, that strange, guilty silence that always follows violence. Crows watched from the branches as the resistance gathered the wounded and buried the dead. Claire Duval stood by the edge of the road, hands on her rifle, staring at the wrecked convoy. Smoke coiled into the grey sky. All this, she murmured, for one man. Her second, a young partisan named Luke, wiped soot from his face. He's not like the others, is he? No, Claire said. He's worse. He's lost. U.S. Command Post, Bayeux, France. Lieutenant Cole sat in front of a field radio, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. The static hissed between messages. He tapped a cigarette against the desk, not lighting it. Sir, said Sergeant Harker, stepping into the tent, Recon 3 just got word. They found Rowe. Cole looked up sharply. Alive? Harker nodded. The MPs are bringing him in. Apparently he's been running with French partisans. Cole muttered a curse under his breath. Of course he has. He stood, grabbed his jacket, and headed for the trucks. When they brought Mick in, he looked like a ghost in uniform. Mud-caked, hollow-eyed, one arm still bound in a blood-stained sling. He didn't resist when the MPs shoved him onto the bench inside the command tent. Cole entered a few minutes later. The two men just stared at each other. There was too much history between them for words to come easy. Finally Cole spoke. You disobeyed orders, Cr. Ost enemy lines, and nearly got a resistance cell wiped out. You've got any idea what kind of mess you've made? Mick didn't answer. He just looked down at his hands, still trembling faintly. Cole took a step closer. Was he there, the man you were chasing? A slow nod. And, got away. Cole exhaled, rubbing his forehead. Christ, Rowe, what were you thinking? Mick's voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. That I could make it mean something. The words hung in the air like smoke. Cole stared at him for a long moment, then turned to the MPs. Get him food, water, and patch that shoulder again. But, sir, do it. When the others had gone, Cole leaned in close. Listen, Command wants to court-martial you. They think you've gone rogue. But I told them you're not a traitor, just broken. Mick looked up, eyes dull. You should have let them believe the first part. Cole hesitated. You're not the only one who's lost someone out here. But revenge isn't a map, Mick. It doesn't lead you home. Mick gave a small, humorless smile. Home's gone. Cole straightened. Then you'd better start figuring out what's left. Later that night in a tent on the edge of the camp, Mick sat alone. His rifle was gone, his dog tag still around his neck. Outside, rain began to fall again, soft and steady. Across the field, Claire and her partisans were being debriefed by Allied command. Through the open flap of her tent, she caught sight of Mick, hunched, motionless. Luke whispered beside her, why do they keep him? He's dangerous. Claire didn't look away. Because men like that win wars. She paused, then added quietly, and because when the war ends, men like that have nothing left. The next morning, the MPs packed up to transfer Mick to the rear for questioning. As they loaded him into the jeep, Cole walked over. They'll ask you about the French cell. About the ambush. Tell them the truth. It might save you. Mick nodded faintly, then met his eyes. And if they ask why I went? Cole sighed. Tell them you were looking for peace. They won't believe you, but maybe you will. The jeep rolled away down the dirt road, engines fading into the mist. Cole stood there long after it was gone. Rain dripped from his helmet brim. Harker came up beside him. You think we'll see him again, sir? Cole's eyes stayed on the road. Men like Rowe don't die easy. He turned back toward camp. And peace doesn't come cheap. Far down the road, inside the jeep, Mick stared through the rain-streaked windshield. The driver hummed softly, some tune from back home, far away from the mud and ghosts. Mick reached into his jacket, fingers brushing the red wolf insignia still hidden inside. The cloth was torn now, faded almost to black. He closed his hand around it and whispered to himself, not yet. The convoy rumbled down a narrow French back road, 2 jeeps and a truck escort. The rain had turned to mist, curling through the trees like breath. Mick sat in the back seat, wrists cuffed, eyes fixed on the blur of grey-green forest. He hadn't said a word in hours. The young corporal beside him kept sneaking glances his way, the kind you give a man you've heard stories about but don't quite believe. You really took out a whole German patrol by yourself? He finally asked. Mick's voice was low. Not by myself. He didn't elaborate. The corporal didn't ask again. A few miles ahead, a fallen tree blocked the road. The lead driver slowed, cursed, and waved the others to a halt. The MP stepped out, scanning the tree line. That's when Mick saw it, a glint of metal through the fog. Ambush, he shouted, but the warning came a heartbeat too late. Machine gun fire erupted from both sides. The air exploded with mud and splinters. One jeep flipped into the ditch, flames leaping from its engine. The driver beside Mick slumped forward, dead before he hit the ground. Mick kicked open the door, hitting the mud hard. The cuffs cut into his wrists as he rolled behind the wrecked jeep. He could see dark figures moving in the mist. Germans, maybe stragglers, maybe SS remnants trying to reach the border. Bullets chewed through the side panel. Mick grabbed the dead driver's sidearm and ducked low. The corporal from earlier crawled up beside him, bleeding from a shoulder wound. They're everywhere, he gasped. Mick yanked the corporal's knife from his belt and slammed it down on his cuffs. One shackle snapped. The second followed with a sharp twist. Stay down, he said. The corporal's eyes widened. You're not gonna run, are you? Mick looked at him. Mud, fear, youth. The kid was barely 20. Not yet, he said. Then he rose into the smoke. The firefight was chaos. Germans closing from the right, another squad pushing through the trees. Mick moved on instinct, darting between trunks, firing short, controlled bursts. The M1 he grabbed from a fallen MP felt heavy, honest. A grenade landed near the wounded corporal. Mick turned, sprinted, and dove, grabbing the grenade and hurling it back just before it went off midair. The shockwave lifted him, slammed him hard into the mud. His ears rang, vision blurred. But he was still breathing. He crawled toward the corporal, dragging him behind the overturned jeep. The boy's breathing was ragged. Mick tore a strip from his own sleeve and pressed it against the wound. Hold on, he muttered. Through the fog, movement, another German creeping close, rifle raised. Mick fired once. The man dropped. It was over as fast as it began. The surviving Germans LTED back into the trees, leaving only silence and smoke behind. Hours later, Allied reinforcements found the wreck. 3 dead MPs, 2 survivors. One of them, the corporal, alive only because someone had stayed behind. Cole arrived by jeep, uniform soaked, face tight. He crouched beside the corporal. What happened? The boy swallowed. Ambush, sir. We were hit hard. Rowe, Cole leaned in. What about Rowe? The corporal looked up, dazed. He saved me, pulled me out. Then he just walked off into the woods. Cole straightened slowly, eyes following the tree line where the mist still clung to the branches. He said nothing for a long time. Finally, he muttered, almost to himself, maybe he finally found his way. Somewhere near the Meuse River, dusk, Mick walked alone along the riverbank, jacket torn, boots heavy with mud. In his hand, he held 2 objects, his brother's dog tags, and the blood-stained red wolf insignia, the mark of the man he'd hunted. He stared at them for a long time. Then, one by one, he let them fall into the river. They sank without a ripple. The current carried him away, just as it carried the echoes of war, silent, unseen, but never gone. Mick turned toward the horizon where artillery still thundered faintly in the distance. He adjusted his pack, squared his shoulders, and began walking toward the sound. A man can lose everything in war, the narrator's voice might say. But if he still knows what he won't do, maybe there's hope left in him yet. France, late autumn, 1944. The war was still burning across Europe, but here, in this quiet stretch of northern France, the guns had gone silent. The air carried that strange emptiness that follows battle, a calm too fragile to trust. Mick Rowe walked alone down a road that had no name. The trees were bare now, their black branches reaching out like hands frozen in farewell. The mud still held the marks of tank treads and boots, the ghosts of movements long since past. His uniform was faded, patched, stripped of rank insignia. To any soldier passing by, he looked like another drifter, one more man the war had used up and forgotten to bury. In his pocket, he carried a folded letter, paper worn thin, edges softened by sweat and rain. It wasn't from home. He'd written it to himself. The road north he passed through the ruins of villages, Stone walls cracked by shellfire, windows hollow like the eyes of the dead. Once, he'd have walked fast, alert for danger. Now, he moved slower, listening. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang, not a warning, but a call to prayer. He stopped to listen. It was a sound he hadn't heard since before the beaches, before Danny, before everything turned red. He remembered the two of them standing by a similar bell tower in a small American town. Danny had been 17 then, smiling, clumsy, full of impossible dreams. Mick closed his eyes. He could still hear his brother's laugh echoing through the churchyard, that bright sound of a life untouched by war. Now, there was only the wind. A village called Saint-Pierre. He reached it by dusk, a half-ruined cluster of homes around a church still standing despite the cracks in its steeple. Smoke rose from one chimney, a rare sign of life. A woman came out to meet him, grey-haired, wrapped in a shawl too thin for the cold. She looked at him with quiet suspicion until she saw the faded American patch on his sleeve. "You're late to the war," she said in careful English. Mick gave a faint smile. "I'm not sure I'm still in it." She studied his face, the kind of look only someone who's lost much can give. Then she nodded toward the house. "Come, you look hungry." He followed her inside. The walls smelled of wood smoke and earth. Two children huddled near a small fire, wide-eyed at the sight of the stranger. The woman handed him a bowl of thin soup. "You fought near here?" she asked. "Farther east," he said. "Then, nowhere for a while." She nodded. "Many men say that." Later, when the children slept, the woman asked, "Who did you lose?" Mick hesitated. "My brother." Her eyes softened. "I lost 2 sons. The war takes what it wants. The rest of us, we keep walking." He looked down at his hands, scarred, cracked, shaking faintly. "Sometimes I think walking is the hardest part." She reached across the table, her hand resting on his. "Then you are still alive, monsieur. That is enough." The letter that night, Mick sat outside the cottage under a pale, quiet moon. He unfolded the letter, the one he'd written weeks before, in a field hospital. "Danny, I don't know if this will ever reach you. I used to think revenge would make me feel closer to you. But all it did was make you farther away. Maybe peace isn't something we find. Maybe it's something we stop running from." He paused, reading it again, hearing his brother's voice in his head, calm, teasing, alive. He smiled a little, the first real smile in months. Then he tore the letter once, twice, and let the pieces scatter into the wind. The graveyard at dawn. Before leaving Saint-Pierre, Mick climbed the hill above the village. There was a small graveyard there, rows of wooden crosses, some with names, most without. He knelt beside one unmarked cross. No one was buried there that he knew, but that didn't matter. He took the last thing he carried, Danny's dog tag, and pressed it into the dirt. "Rest easy, kid," he whispered. "We made it." For a moment, the morning light broke through the clouds, catching the metal tag just so, a flash of silver, then gone. He stood there for a while, letting the wind move through the grass, feeling something inside him shift. Not healed, not whole, but lighter. The road west. When he walked back down the hill, the world felt different. The air cleaner, the silence softer. In the distance, a column of Allied vehicles moved west, soldiers laughing, radios crackling with swing music. Mick stopped at the edge of the road and watched them pass. A young GI leaned out of a truck. "Hey, buddy, you heading home?" Mick thought about it, the word home, what it meant now. He nodded once. "Yeah," he said, "something like that." The truck rumbled away, the sound fading into the horizon. Epilogue 1946, Pennsylvania. 2 years later, the Rowe farm lay quiet under the summer sun. Grass grew wild where the barn once stood. The old flag still hung in the window, faded to gray. A car stopped at the edge of the dirt drive. Mick stepped out slowly, boots dusty, coat over his arm. He looked older than his years, the kind of tired that no rest could cure. He walked up to the porch and sat on the steps. The cicadas hummed in the trees, that same sound from before the war. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph, 2 boys in uniform, grinning at the camera, the world still simple behind them. Mick looked at it for a long time, then set it on the porch railing, letting the breeze take it. It fluttered once, twice, then drifted off into the field. Final narration, voiceover style. War doesn't end when the guns fall silent. It ends when the men who fought in it stop hearing the echoes. Some never do, but for a few, like Mick Rowe, the echoes become something else. A reminder that even in the darkest places, there was once love. And that's enough to keep walking.